Hello everyone and welcome back to the maintenance phase reaction. So today we're going to wrap up the presidential's physical fitness test episode. And I think they are now going into issues that they have with the presidential fitness test, although they've been kind of talking about issues that they've had throughout this, but we'll just go ahead and hear their kind of concise breakdown and see how things go.
Which I'm like, okay, but then what is it though?
This actually gets into the next section that we're going to dwell on for a while, which is the problems with the president's physical fitness test. So even on this, there's not as much academic literature as I would like, but there's actually much more on the challenges of the test and the deficiencies of the test than there is on its actual history. So as the test becomes much more popular, much more widespread, kids are being now required by law to get it every single year, studies start coming out about the fact that it's really not achieving any of its goals. And one of the reasons is that kids are not practicing the president's physical fitness test. I mean, this is something that really made an audible click in my head when I was reading it, that in middle school, we would just have gym class and, we'd play volleyball and whatever. And then one day a year, we would do this dumb physical fitness test, and then we would just go back to what we were doing.
Right. You weren't doing a sit and reach every month.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was basically, okay, a random Wednesday, we're just going to come in, you're going to do this thing, you're going to feel like shit.
Yeah.
And then we're never going to talk about it again.
And then we're going to go back to playing dodgeball, and we won't test you on your dodgeball acuity or whatever.
This is a valid critique of how the presidential fitness test was executed. There was no curriculum to go along with the presidential physical fitness test. And in general, it varies from state to state, so I can't say for other states, but there is a prep program that you go through to become a gym teacher. It's not a test only subject where I am. It's something that you have to go through a course for, but the thing is that course covers high school, middle school, and elementary school because they don't know what age level you're going to end up at. So the primary focus would be high school, given high school sports are so important in the U.S. So granted, I haven't taken the physical fitness course. It's on my list of things that I want to do eventually, but I have not taken it, so I don't know the breadth of information that you gain. I can say that the courses that you have to go through to get endorsements are a hit or miss. Some depending on what school you end up at, depending on there's a bunch of schools that have different courses for different credentials to get. And sometimes you need the online only option, and there's only one option for the credential that you want, that you can still pay in-state tuition for, that is online. And so you kind of end up with what you end up with. And my guess is that there isn't a huge cohesive curriculum just for becoming a gym teacher either. Again, this is a valid critique, but I don't know if they realize that the issue with the critique is that it's more systemic than they realized. This isn't the teachers' fault per se. I mean, the gym teachers are pretty much making their own curriculum. There's no curriculum to go along with gym as far as I know. So that does fall into a deficiency on their part to a degree. I would also say, though, that in general they're not given many tools, and they're having to contend with maybe teaching to the presidential fitness test, but also still trying to, depending on the age level, especially for elementary school, they have to make it fun. They have to make sure the kids get their energy out, or the teachers, the classroom teachers are going to be upset because the kids are still too riled up. And then there's admin that has their own idea of what the gym should be. They're balancing a lot of priorities. I'm not saying that there isn't some issue with the system, but they have to contend with priorities from multiple different levels, as well as their own desire and their own idea of what's good to teach the kids. So there's just a lot of expectations to manage with not a whole lot of support.
ever, right? Yeah.
So it's totally separated from any actual program. I mean, I could actually see some use in some of these things like, hey, we're going to help
Sure.
kids get flexible. So at the beginning of the year, we're going to do the toe touch. We're going to do a bunch of other stretching exercises. Every single day for 3 months, we're all going to do stretches together as a class. And at the end, we're going to test ourselves again. And look how much you improved. I can see that being a pretty positive experience for kids. Like, look, you can train your body and you can become better at something. And maybe you'll find a love for like downward dogging or something. And maybe you'll continue doing that at home. Great. But it was never done like that. It was just like, you piece of shit, you can't even do one pull-up. Okay, see you next year, where you're also not going to be able to do one pull-up.
So like basically the lesson that we learned that sparked this whole thing, right? That European kids were getting practice in these specific things. We then did not apply
Oh, yeah.
for all of this time, right?
Yeah.
We shouldn't be allowed to be surprised by you didn't practice a thing and then you didn't get better at it, right?
Yeah.
Like, that shouldn't be, that's just like people.
I mean, again, though, to kind of in defense of gym teachers, I really can only speak to elementary levels. And the presidential physical fitness test is applied as early as first grade. So I would like to say that trying to teach kids how to do a pull-up, like a proper pull-up, have you ever tried to manage a room of 25 6-year-olds? It is like herding cats. All right, they need something fun to do. And I'm not saying that I don't understand the fault with this, and I think they're talking about later ages, but the presidential physical fitness test does apply to elementary school. So I do have to say that the primary goal of physical fitness, or PE, it's physical education. There we go. I got it. In elementary school is generally to get the kids' energy out, so that way they can manage their academics a little bit better and pay better attention in class. And on top of that, they say every day, oh, well, we'll do this every day. The kids don't have gym every day. And when I worked in a middle school, they didn't have PE every day. Even if they took PE, like it would be like a twice to 3 times a week subject. So, and even at elementary school, they get it, I think, twice a week tops. There is the issue there with they're only getting PE twice a week. It's not something that they do every day. And trying to tell kids, especially elementary school level kids, to practice something at home, it's not going to happen. Like, I'm sure it doesn't happen at the middle school or high school level either, but especially at elementary school, they won't remember those instructions in an hour. They just won't. Especially the kids that, like, first through fourth grade isn't going to remember shit. Like, they're just not. They don't. And fifth grade has gotten to a point where they don't give a fuck. Like, half the time. Like, half the kids don't give a fuck. So, it's one of those things where, like, I understand what you're saying. I'm not saying that this is wrong. I think it's actually a fairly valid critique. But there's, just as there's some things on the admin side, there's some things with trying to herd a bunch of 6-year-olds into doing a single exercise when they don't have, like, that body awareness to do it properly yet. So you basically try really hard to get everyone to be able to do some slight form of it, something vaguely in the right form once. And then everyone's just playing tag and running around the gym because they need to get the energy out. It's one of those things, you know?
That's just how people work.
Totally. And another problem with this, and I think this is really key to almost all of these sort of national overall projects that we have about PE in schools, is that schools, teachers were never really given very much instruction or extra resources for this. Again, it's not...
Okay, I love that they actually reference this. This is true. Teachers don't get much guidance or support, and especially specialist PE, music, library, tech, don't get, like, they make their own curriculum. They, unlike classroom teachers, which have typically, like, a set curriculum book that tells them step by step what to do through a lesson. and then sometimes they'll design their own like extra activities because the curriculum won't necessarily span the full year. Kids sometimes need to revisit subjects. There's creative and more fun ways to approach subject, especially for like second grade when there's they're learning how to read an analog clock. The teachers have a variety of funner activities to have the kids practice that. But generally, classroom teachers have like a set curriculum for each subject that's provided by the district, chosen by the district, that dictates the activities, the book that's read in support, how the process is taught, down to math. Like, they have this new way of doing math. Doesn't make a shit bit of sense to me. I ended up teaching the kids the old school way, the way I learned how to do. Like, I forgot what it was, like, learn to multiply two numbers that were at least 3 digits long, and how to do that. They had something called the box method, which I didn't understand. I did the traditional method that I learned to do as a kid. So, and that resonated with some kids and it didn't with others, but the teacher never taught them the original method because the curriculum didn't provide instruction for that. And then it becomes up to the teacher whether to teach alternative methods or not.
Not like this was like a 6-week fun program that all the kids are going to do together and we're all going to become stronger in these specific ways. It was like, hey, PE teachers, you're required by law to give this test once a year, but we're never going to give you guidelines on how to do it, how to communicate the results to kids, or what the results mean. Teachers since the 1950s have absolutely hated this test, and teachers and principals have been opposed to it from day one, but no one ever really...
I think that's a bit of a broad statement right there. Some teachers and some admins have been against it since day one. Some thought it was a really good metric. Some thought it needed to be tweaked. Saying, like, teachers and admins just in general, like, whole country-wise, were just against it and the government didn't listen is a little bit of a misrepresentation. There are some people that think that it should be done away with entirely. There are some people that think it needs to be modified. There's a lot of conflicting opinions even within the education sphere on tests and curriculum and how things are done. It's almost like a separate political sphere, if you will.
Listened to those concerns or took them seriously because, like, oh, it's just teachers, who cares?
God,
right?
honestly,
it's only the people on whom we depend for the success of these programs, so why would we listen to them? Obviously, right?
I mean, this is sort of like a shitty like obstructionist term that gets thrown around a lot, but like it is a pretty classic unfunded mandate. Yeah,
oh yeah, exactly.
That's just like, just go do a bunch of other stuff and we're not going to pay you for it. We're not going to figure it out for you. You'll figure it out for yourselves and whatever. But you should definitely be very concerned about it.
Right.
Like, what?
I mean, this is one of my biggest shocks when I was researching this. And because I'm a methodology queen, I get really angry at stuff like this. First of all, the data that we get from the fitness tests is pretty shitty because the data is being gathered in such a poor way. Like, they say in the BMI test that a lot of kids are getting weighed like with their jackets on or with their shoes on.
That's like Fat Lady 101. You go into Weight Watchers, you take off as many clothes as you can.
Yeah.
Come on. It's like...
So I would argue that the BMI, when they're being weighed and stuff, as long as it's consistent, it should be fine. But yeah, kids are typically weighed with shoes and jackets. If and when they are weighed, the school doesn't have time for each kid to like remove their jacket and stuff. Like, it has to be a very fast moving train of kids. Keep in mind, an average elementary school would be about 500 kids, middle school would be around 1,200, and then high school can be upwards of that 2,000 kids or even more. So when you have to do these things, you are moving at a pretty quick pace. You don't have kids remove their shoes, you don't have kids remove their jacket, you just weigh them as they are and then you move them along. We try to tell the kids, okay, you're being weighed today, so keep that in mind and be prepared when you get to the scale, but kids are only going to half listen to you anyway, so it is just a matter of working within a very tight time constraint and trying to move through as many people as possible.
These kids don't even know how to diet.
But Like, this is, to me, is completely ridiculous that no one ever did anything with the results.
Ugh.
The primary thing that was done with the actual numbers that were produced by millions of kids taking this test every year was they would just identify kids to get awards.
Ugh.
So all that stuff about like percentile rankings, all of that is based on other academic studies that were done. The actual numbers that were produced by all of the surveillance of all these kids, no public health departments were plugged into that. That wasn't going to principals to like track kids over time. All of these numbers that we produced, they didn't do anything. They were just there to make us feel shitty. And then they just went into the recycling bin.
Yeah, so they weren't even like aggregated. There wasn't even like a report. Ugh. Reagan.
And another thing that comes up in the studies on this is that none of the actual fitness tests measured fitness. So I found a really good meta-analysis of all of the individual tests that were the components of the president's physical fitness tests. And there's literally no evidence that the ability to do pull-ups is related to overall upper body strength.
Right. If it did, no one would have any, we would all have T-Rex arms.
Exactly. Yes.
Like, of course it's not indicative of shit.
I think that that's a grand generalization to make. Being able to do a pull-up, there's marker, that's just such a batshit take to me of being able to do a pull-up has absolutely no indication of upper body strength. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? Yes, the ability to do a pull-up, the ability to pull up your own body weight from a hanging position is indicative of at least a certain level of upper body strength. Is it total upper body strength? No, because it's only identifying a few muscles. But that in conjunction with like the push-ups and a couple of other exercises, it's like, I'm not saying that the presidential fitness test was perfect by any means, but one, the ability to pull up your body weight from a hanging position is just generally a good ability to have, I would say, for emergency situations. Even if we put away the potential use of that ability, it takes significant upper body strength to be able to pull yourself up, at least in certain muscle groups. Maybe not the entire upper body, but in certain muscle groups in the arms and the back, there is some like actual strength that is required to be able to do that. Otherwise, everyone would be able to do it. So this is where they start to go off into La La Land. Like, the nothing being done with the results doesn't actually surprise me. We test kids for a lot of things. But as the years have gone on, there's been much more focus, especially after COVID. Right now, the entire focus is reading, writing, math. That's the entire focus right now for a lot of schools, is just getting their reading and math scores up. So the idea that even for the past 50 years, nothing was done with those presidential scores doesn't particularly surprise me. Like I've said, things that weren't specifically, even though this was before COVID, generally things that aren't reading, writing, math, science, like, you get a lot of lip service. There's a lot of things that we have to do in the school's district that doesn't, like, it's pointless. We get trainings over and over again on stupid shit, and then we don't get trainings on the stuff that we actually desperately ask for. I can't tell you how many equity trainings I've had, and these trainings on, like, how to take care of your mental health, that's basically spewing platitudes and nothing that's super helpful. But when we ask for training on how to deal with an escalated student that is showing potential danger to themselves, others, or property, what are we supposed to do with that? Kids who, we call it eloping, when the kids try to run. Technically, right now, the kids can leave the school, run down the street, and all we can do is follow them. We cannot force them back. We cannot do anything to even really contain them or protect them. At least that's what I've heard from the special education paras I work with, because it's primarily the special education students that are eloping. And it's like, what am I supposed to do? How do I keep them safe when the special ed paras or teachers is not available, and I'm here by myself, and when the kids heads out, I have 20 other students to look after. What am I supposed to do? We get no training on any of that. what do we do with students that are not necessarily an immediate danger to themselves, others, or property, but are clearly in an escalated mental state that seems to be them entering a level of crisis? What do we do? What do we do? We get no training on that. None whatsoever. So there is an issue with how testing data is handled and how teachers are trained to do shit. We get a lot of training on, like, fluffy stuff that sounds lovely in theory, but on an everyday basis isn't very applicable to us. There's a lot of lip service, and it got written down on paper sort of procedures in the education sphere. There's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape.
It actually comes up in this review that it's extremely strange to pick a measure of fitness that most children cannot do. You can have a lot of different kids that cannot do a pull-up, and some of those kids are extremely fit, and some of those kids are extremely unfit. But because all of them are putting up the number 0, you're not catching any of those gradations.
I mean, to a certain extent, that's a fair point, but if the kid that plays a lot of soccer can't do a pull-up because his upper body was underdeveloped because the sport that he's interested in focuses more on the lower body, then I would say that's still something relevant to look into in how to more holistically train and prepare this young person's body to be more physically fit. Like, they can be fit, but you can be fit, but there still be areas of weakness. Just as academically, you can be very smart, you can be very academically proficient, but you can still have a weak subject. It's the same thing.
Right.
And so what this review finds is that pull-ups are a much better measure of body fat percentage than anything else, because your body weight is inversely correlated to how many pull-ups you can do. So you're basically just measuring how fat the kids are. It's not actually useful as any...
I slightly disagree with this. I can see how body fat percentage can help line up because less weight to pull up means that it's easier to pull up, but there still has to be a level of muscle. I guarantee that there are skinny kids that cannot do a pull up. They may not have much body fat, but they may not have much muscle either. Like, I would say the two have to work in tandem together.
Anything else.
Like, this is always sort of a fascinating thing when people talk about fitness, where they're like, I don't know, that fat guy gets winded real fast. And I'm like, yeah, he's carrying 200 more pounds than you are.
Yes. And he's working harder. Yes.
And he's working harder every day to do everything.
Right.
I don't understand how they can say that and then they're like, it's okay to be fat. You just acknowledged that this person gets winded easily because they are carrying 200 pounds of extra weight. Wouldn't that suggest to you that they need to lose the weight? This isn't related to the presidential fitness test at all. I'm just saying. These people have argued of, like, health at every size, and that some people are, like, naturally fat, but you've also, then, like, we've heard that fat people can be fit. But yet you acknowledge here that this person carrying 200 extra pounds was more likely to get winded. Don't you see the issue there? And for the record, I do think that overweight people can be fit. Even, like, class 1 obese people can be fit. I think once you get up to a certain level, though, I don't think that you can necessarily... I think if you're morbidly obese, you can't really be fit. But that's my own personal perspective.
Understand how this doesn't translate for folks, but okay.
So basically, if we were designing a fitness test from scratch now, we would not be using any of these things because they don't actually test fitness.
Mm-hmm.
The studies actually mention that there's no good test for fitness of kids generally. Because when we talk about, how fit should kids be, it's really difficult because what we're basically trying to do is predict things far in the future, right? Which kids are going to get heart disease, which kids are going to get lower back pain, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really difficult to tell what should kids be able to do at 12 that's going to predict what happens to them when they're 50.
It is presenting itself as public health work,
Mm-hmm.
and what it is doing, for sure, is just ramping up weight stigma.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is one of...
This is such bullshit. This is such bullshit. And this idea that it's trying to predict lower back pain, that doesn't sound like anything, like that's not typically how education works, at least in my experience. We don't think much past 12th grade in terms of the projection of kids, although that might change a little bit in the high school in terms of career planning for the kids and stuff, but at least in elementary school, we're not thinking about the kids' lower potential for lower back pain 20 years from now. We're just not really thinking about it. It's more about combating childhood obesity and providing a level of physical education that they would understand how to do certain exercises and making exercise, especially at the elementary level, making exercise fun for kids to encourage a love of physical activity. This overprojection into the future is not something I've ever experienced in education. We don't think that far. We think about where they're going to be when they exit the system. And that's about as far as we go. At least on a, like, feet on the ground sort of person work.
One of the central criticisms of the fitness test that starts showing up in the literature around 2000, especially after the implementation of No Child Left Behind, when a lot of schools start cutting PE programs, and some schools even start cutting recess, because everything becomes built around standardized test scores. And so a lot of schools cut their PE programs because they have to focus on STEM or whatever, but they still have this legal requirement to do the fitness test. So a lot of schools that don't even have PE will sort of one day a year pull all the kids aside and make them do these humiliating fitness tests and weigh them, and then just send them back into school. So it's not even like this is being contextualized in a PE class. It's literally just you're sitting all the time, and then we test you and we're like, why are you so unhealthy? And then you just go back to sitting the next day.
Right. It also feels like we don't have a test once a year to see how well you can draw a still life and then defund art education, right? Like, it's like, hey man, there's a pretty clear connection here from one to the other.
Yes. And so I want to end the episode with this really fascinating article by Michael.
Before they get into the article that they're going to talk about, I just want to say I fully believe that I know that PE was cut in some schools during No Child Left Behind. I remember hearing a lot of that around the time that was happening. And the pulling kids to do the mandated test once a year but not providing them any physical education outside of that, I can also see, because they just need to check things off. The vast majority of people probably that were in those situations probably weren't like, well, why can't you do this? It was a matter of just checking off marks. Kids may have internalized something else from it, but as far as the adults were concerned, I guarantee that there wasn't, unless someone in particular was just an asshole, no one was really thinking in terms of it being the kid's fault. There might have been a recognition of, holy shit, these kids can't do these things, but it's not a judgment on the children themselves. We can, as educators, we can recognize when the system fails the kids. We can, and we can be really frustrated about it, but we don't necessarily blame the kids. There's two different things there. There are some asshole teachers that will blame the kids, saying, well, they could do this at home, and like they're just kind of assholes about it. But by and large, the average teacher is not going to judge the child for something that the system has failed them on. We recognize when the system fails kids. We do.
Ray, who's the academic who I emailed about the lack of history on the president's physical fitness test. So he wrote a fascinating article called "Why is there so little critical physical education scholarship in the United States?" And it's basically about this problem that the same articles with the same panic statistics keep getting published, and yet nobody seems to come to the obvious conclusion that fitness testing is not working. That there's an entire body of researchers that are looking at the data that is being produced by this and the experiences that kids are having and have been having as a result of these tests for almost 40 years now. And they're just like, well, it has to still be good. Mm-hmm. So what he says is the remarkable point here is that despite these findings,
I feel the need to chime in of like, well, it has to still be good. No, that's not That's not what anyone thinks. No one sees like a failing system and thinks, well, it has to still be good. It's just not a priority because physical education is low man on the totem pole in terms of like optimizing things. PE will always get less funding and will have funding taken from it in favor of STEM and reading programs. It's not that anyone thinks that, oh, well, this still has to be good. That's not what anyone's thinking. It's just like, well, it's what we have right now, and we don't have the funding or the manpower to reinvent it. So it's like it's the education system in a nutshell. You rob Peter to pay Paul. So unfortunately, the stuff that regularly gets robbed is PE, music, art, and library. Tech less so because they want the kids to be tech literate. When something needs to be taken away, it's going to be something that is not reading, writing, math, or STEM, which I guess includes math, but you guys would get what I mean.
Widespread inaccuracies, negative student and teacher perceptions, and potentially harmful practices, the authors remain apparently unshakable in their support for fitness testing. An interesting feature of papers such as this is the
Okay, no, listen to that, to the way that's phrased, though. Teachers remain insistent on fitness testing. There's a difference between being in favor of fitness testing and being in favor of the presidential fitness test. Fitness testing, I think, is worth noting. I think that it needs to stay. We need to be able to track kids' physical fitness. Whether the presidential physical fitness test is the right fit for that is something completely different. That's the way things work in education. If you're not naming something specific, you're talking very generally.
way the distaste or disinterest of people toward fitness testing is almost uniformly interpreted as a matter of communication rather than substance. Indeed, despite the widely reported resistance of parents, children, and teachers in the fitness testing literature, fitness testing is presented as a settled and unassailable practice that is inherently beneficial for individuals, families, and society. This shit is fire emojis. He's really mad about this.
Yeah.
And I found a bunch of articles in the literature that illustrate exactly the point that he is making. It's amazing. There's all of these papers about sort of the ongoing debate about fitness testing and should we keep fitness testing, and it's a controversial subject, and what are the pros and cons. And what is amazing about them is that when they present the pros and cons of fitness testing, all of the pros are potential things of fitness testing, and all of the cons are actual drawbacks.
So the pros are sort of like,
as is par for the course for literally any form of testing in education. Because what you don't understand is it has to be the benefits have to be presented as the ways of potential benefit, because each cohort of students is going to react differently to the same test. The drawbacks tend to be the same roughly across the board for most things, but the benefits vary more widely.
imagined.
Yeah, let me walk you through one of these.
Yeah,
so
tell
one
me.
of the main sort of literature reviews of, the debate surrounding fitness testing, the data surrounding fitness testing, it lists at the end of the article the pros and the cons, what are the good, what are the bad, what do various people say. They've read all of the literature. The first benefit that he lists is tracking the fitness of youth. Information concerning the distribution of scores can be used to track youth fitness over time. Well, they're not doing that.
Right. In order to do that, you would have to aggregate your data somewhere.
You guys are confusing tracking with analysis. We track and keep records of student progress. Whether that is analyzed and utilized is something else and more dependent on funding and manpower. There's a difference there.
In order to do that, you would have to do that. This paper also does something that I think is very typical, where people substitute the benefits of fitness testing for the benefits of fitness.
Mm-hmm.
So they say, fitness is really good for kids. And it's like, yeah, fitness is really good for kids, but that doesn't mean fitness testing is good for kids. Right, that's not an argument to tell.
This isn't a matter of oh my god, they don't understand how the education system works. Fitness testing has to be used to justify funding for PE. That's why so many schools got PE back, because there was a drop in those. I guarantee Unfortunately, I don't have anything specific to support this. I'm not even sure where I would necessarily find it, but just working in the education system, testing validates funding. Testing justifies funding. That is how you get funding for programs. If the students are showing better running scores when schools have running clubs, funding will be provided so that way those running clubs can exist. It's a matter of the PE department will get a set amount of funding for the year, and however they choose to put that funding in has to be noted down, has to be recorded. It's probably not analyzed very often. It's probably not looked into a huge amount. But if they see that that funding has resulted in better fitness scores, then they have a greater likelihood of getting more funding for that program because it showed a positive statistical benefit. Is physical testing perfect? No, but it's what we have to justify funding for the time being. It's the same way that increased reading scores with schools that have librarians and functional libraries is what justifies the funding for those libraries, is those higher reading scores.
Tell kids to do pull-ups and then make them feel shitty for not being able to do a pull-up once a year. That's very distinct from like, let's all play volleyball on Wednesdays.
If you want to
play volleyball on Wednesday, you have to take the fitness test that we can provide to the powers that be to justify, look, we are still doing this. We're still providing data. Whether that data is used is kind of beside the point sometimes. I know I said that it's used to justify funding, and it is when they're looking to cut budget. Okay, this is so hard to explain. Sometimes it's used for programs, like I said before, it's used to justify programs. Sometimes when they're looking for budget cuts, they may cut the programs, but they won't cut PE entirely because look at all the data we've provided. So it really kind of depends year to year. It depends on how much money the school district gets. It's a constant money game. That is what schools deal with. My school district had to cut $82 million from our budget, meaning that a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of schools are without basic supplies, and a lot of programs had to be cut. It's a matter of where can we justify cutting whatever. The kids still have PE right now because the PE teachers, at least in my district, have been doing a pretty decent job justifying their existence. I don't know whether most likely through test scores, quite frankly. But how that's done, I don't know. I'm not in the PE sphere, but I know how justification for our jobs works, and that's part of it.
Foment a sort of commitment to fitness.
Mm-hmm.
A, you need a class, and B, you need a class where instructors are aware of, what makes kids take things in and what makes kids change their behaviors and that kind of thing.
Oh, way to speak like someone who hasn't worked with 500 kids in a week. You need to be able to do things on how kids take things in and how to, support students. That is so viciously different from student to student, from class to class. And I say viciously because it's really like something that can work very well for an entire class. The next class, kids can be crying, kids can get aggressive because they're upset with how you're presenting things. You guys act like all kids respond the same way, and they don't.
Not going to do it by hiring a bunch of football coaches and then being like, anyway, now care about fat kids.
Exactly.
That's just not going to happen.
Another one of the main arguments for fitness testing is that we need to raise awareness of the obesity epidemic.
What?
This is something you see in so many articles. It's like, oh, we need to make kids aware that the obesity epidemic is a problem and that physical fitness is good. And it's like, again, testing them and making them feel shitty is not a good approach to this.
They keep grouping testing with making them feel shitty. No one is trying to make the kids feel like shit, unless they're a really shitty teacher. No, it's not to make the kids feel like shit. It's a necessary evil, for the lack of a better term. Could the physical fitness test be improved? I think it could be, just from what we looked at in the past couple parts, like that PDF file of what's, like, I think the expectation for how fast students can run a mile is a little high. Like, I think they have slightly unreasonable expectations for how fast a student can be able to run a mile. But, and I just think that there are some better options available for exercises that we have the kids do. Like, personally, I would like to see squats, and, like, so kids can learn how to squat and, like, pick something up. And I think that would be a very good functional thing to test, because it's something that they will use in their everyday lives. It's not to make kids feel shitty. It's what we have.
Right. I mean, it's the same reason that, like, ideally, if you have a math test and you have kids who have a hard time with math, you don't call them up to the front of the class and be like, hey, look at these dummies.
Right.
Like, it's like that's
Right.
not a way that people learn, nor is it a way that people get invested.
Yes, it's like, I think all kids should learn to read, but instead of actually giving them time to read and dedicating teachers to teaching them how to read, I'm just going to test them once a year and be like, why the fuck can't you read?
Okay, but they do dedicate teachers. The teachers may not have enough support, and I don't know. There's a lot of working parts here that I feel like they're missing.
That's my way of raising awareness of the importance of reading.
Ugh.
And then this is from this literature review. It says, when tests are properly administered, fitness testing provides useful information for students to determine their needs, setting goals, and plan programs for improvement. Well, again, they're not doing that. So yes, if they were properly administered, sure, they have.
That's not true. Some schools do that. The middle school that I worked at did that with the kids that signed up for PE. It was part of their health and fitness education, was to use the information to set goals for themselves. And there was a very big stress on not comparing yourself to your classmates. But the thing is that that's what kids are going to do anyway. So it doesn't really, it's just something, but at least at the middle school level, that was something that the teachers did. I remember, because I had a couple of ELL students, because I was student teaching in the ELL classroom, come to me asking for help because they didn't understand what the word goal meant, and they didn't understand what the teacher was asking of them, essentially. So I got to help them with their homework some, and that was something that the teacher was telling them to do. They didn't understand how to set realistic goals. They're like, this is the aim for the presidential fitness test at the end of the year, but right now I want you to pick a goal that's best for you and what you're going to aim to do. They kind of actually told, now that I think about it, they told the kids to not worry too much about the fitness test at the end of the year, and that they should, like, work on trying to achieve that in, like, 8th grade or something like that. But the goal of the class that they were in was to find their best personal plan and their best personal goals. So it is done. It just kind of varies from teacher to teacher.
The potential to do that. But that's been true since the 1950s, and that potential has never been reached.
Right.
So I don't see why that's really relevant. Like, yeah, a lot of things have potential to be good.
Yes, totally. There's a ton of potential. The question is, does a test fulfill that potential?
Right.
And it seems like we don't really know that.
I mean, maybe there's a school district in America that has done fitness testing as part of an integrated program in a way that doesn't make kids feel shitty about themselves. But as far as
I see. That's the thing, though, is that you guys are making one of the criteria is to make sure kids don't feel shitty about themselves. Some kids are just going to feel shitty about themselves because they can't do it. The perfectionist kids, the kids that feel like sports is all they have, like their big identity is sports and physical fitness, and if they can't do it, they're going to feel shitty about themselves. The kids that see that they can't do what the rest of their classmates can do are going to feel shitty about themselves. There's only so much we as educators can do to curtail how kids feel about themselves. To a certain extent, we have to just teach the kids, I understand this is how you feel about yourself right now, but let's use that for positive change. Let's not beat ourselves up. We do our best to have the kids in what's called a growth mindset and work on improving, not on labeling themselves as like a failure or something. But like I said, there's only so much we can do.
as a nationwide program and legal requirements, it's clear that this is not working.
Mm-hmm.
So after listing all of these potential benefits of fitness tests, things that could come to pass but have not, they start listing the drawbacks. First one is teacher motivation and support. Teachers are not being motivated. Teachers are not supported. Teachers fucking hate this. That's a real, that's not a potential. That's a real thing. Teachers have.
So something that's worth noting is that when we as teachers say we hate something, we often don't mean throw out the baby with the bathwater. Like, oftentimes we as teachers can see potential in something, but we want it tweaked. And we don't have the freedom to do that, and that's more the issue. Just so I can kind of pass that out there. There's a lot of things where it's like we like portions but hate how it's handled as a whole. So when teachers say that they hate something, sometimes it just means the whole thing in its entirety. More often it means parts of something.
Disliked this test for 70 years, right?
Right, but in order to take that into account, we would have to listen to what teachers have to say about education, Michael. Why would we do that?
Exactly.
Why would we start that now?
We'd have to ask teachers what they need. No. This one is amazing. The second bullet point on the cons of fitness testing is student motivation and self-esteem. Of concern are the percentage of elementary school teachers reporting that students cried during testing and the reports of.
You're dealing with 6-year-olds. They're gonna cry. They don't want to do it. Just for the record, saying that for elementary school students, there's a percentage of students that cry. We are dealing with kids as young as 6 years old. I don't think you realize how often students cry for small things. It can simply be, and that doesn't include our SPED students that don't understand why we're asking them to do something and they simply don't want to do it. And so they get escalated. Again, we'd like training on how to help our students when they are escalated. And they get angry and they start crying. We also have students that are sometimes just really tired. We have students that will, their families will take them on vacation partway through the year. They'll come back. They're a week and a half to 2 weeks behind. And then on top of that, they're jet lagged. So that's the more well-off school that I work at. But then with the other one, their parents are constantly working. They're tired for a variety of reasons. I had a student that was from a military family, was too young to be left alone. So when with his father to one of the bases for work, they lived off base. But then he didn't get home until 2 a.m. Slept and had to be back at school by 9 a.m. that morning. So there's some students that just, our students come from a variety of backgrounds and struggle in a variety of ways. And sometimes there's a lot on them. Students can cry because of something that's going on in their home life, and they'll say that it's something related to school. Either it's the reading that they hate doing, the writing that they hate doing, the math that they hate doing, and they'll cry because they're overexhausted, they're struggling to understand the material, and they may have been forced to take time away from school because of a sick parent, or their family took them on vacation, or they had a health issue themselves and they're coming back and they're trying to be reintegrated, and they're overwhelmed because they've been dealing, one, with a lot, and then two, they haven't been in school for a while, so they're out of the natural system. And this can all correlate with testing. This can all happen around testing times. That's not unusual. So and honestly, again, we're working with as young as 6-year-olds. Do you have any idea how often 6-year-olds cry because their shoe came untied? We have a variety of maturity levels, especially in elementary school. It varies widely. Sometimes kids just cry because they don't want to do it. Sometimes kids cry because they don't understand what's being asked of them. A kid crying during testing is not indicative of an issue with the test itself. Sometimes the student needs extra support. Sometimes the student has extraneous things going on in their home life that makes them more emotionally sensitive.
High school students who had negative test experiences.
God.
So, kids are fucking crying, and you're ooh, the potential of the test is still there.
I guarantee that's ignoring, because Presidential Fitness Test requires a level of physical exertion that maybe the students' background lives don't leave them with the ability to do. And so they're overtired, putting out extensive amounts of energy on an already taxed system during an emotionally volatile time in their development. Tears will happen as well, even for high schoolers.
Right.
It's like,
You know what I love doing is things that make me cry in front of my peers.
kids are fucking crying taking this test. Teachers fucking hate it. And we're like, well, it could work. But, we're taking no steps to make sure that it works.
Right. And also, how else are we going to know how far a child can throw a grenade?
Yes.
There is essential information embedded.
Again, it's taking it way out of context. I just don't understand this.
Your mind.
Right. So this is from yet another literature review of this debate over fitness testing that says in the fucking abstract, there is currently no consensus on the importance, need, or impact of fitness tests on student experiences in physical education. Several studies highlight the negative impact fitness testing has on students' experiences in physical education, such as the formation of negative attitudes toward PE, decreased motivation toward PE following poor test scores, and feelings of humiliation when failing in front of peers.
Okay, I can actually get behind all of this. This I can definitely see valid critiques with the form of physical testing as it's done right now. Those are things that can be mitigated. Those are things that can be corrected. Unfortunately, this comes once again down to priorities. And right now, everyone's having budget cuts because we lost COVID funding. And there's a big upheaval in the education sphere right now. Schools are not getting enough funding, especially with inflation and the reduction of funding from COVID measures lapsing now. There's some validity in what's being said here, and I can see how the way that it's administered and stuff is not ideal. Again, though, this comes down to priorities, and if admin and the districts and the powers that be aren't focusing more on physical fitness and how to benefit the system more, there's only so much teachers can do.
These findings provide compelling evidence that fitness test experiences do little to promote positive feelings about lifelong physical activity.
So I would argue, though, that it's fitness tests the way they are presented now. I think if they were done in more small groups, so that way, yeah, it's in front of your peers, but it's not in front of a full class of peers, that would help things. But again, you need more staff to separate the kids, have different stations. Maybe some kids go and run the mile out on the track field, some use one side of the gym, some use the other, all while circling around, so that way there's fewer kids having the attention of others at a time. That still requires staff available so that way the kids can be separated.
Activity and fitness. So even on its own terms, even if you're using fitness testing as a way of quote-unquote raising awareness about the need for kids to move and the badness of the obesity epidemic, etc., even on those terms, it's not fulfilling its mission because people are doing this and they're feeling discouraged from doing physical activity because their experience was so bad.
I would say, for me personally, not only did these fitness tests not incentivize physical fitness, they attached trauma to it.
Oh, yeah.
So
Again, overuse of the word trauma, I don't like it.
Like deeply increased my, like I was like a pretty active kid until this kind of shit kicked in where it was.
I don't know if I believe that. Like, I know this sounds terrible, but I don't know if I believe that you loved physical fitness as a kid until the big bad physical testing happened. I don't know if I believe that.
Became this sort of social ranking stuff.
Yes.
So like now when I am like active, which I'm relatively active, right? I have to do it in ways that don't remind me of gym class, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's a reason I've never done another fucking pull-up in my life. There's a reason I don't stand around my house doing wall sits, right? Like there's a reason that all of these things are like, I don't engage with them remotely anymore.
And also, I mean, Michael Garay, this researcher, like one of the only skeptical researchers on this entire field, he has an entire book about how we have tried for decades to use schools as public health promotion devices. DARE is a good example. We've done alcohol education in schools. We've done physical education. We keep trying to use schools as a way to solve public health problems.
I would actually agree with that. The amount of stuff that we're expected to manage with the kids now is insane. There's been this whole promotion of SEL education, which is social emotional learning. And so we have to teach the kids like emotional regulation techniques and how to like regulate your mood and stuff to very young children, on top of everything else that has to be taught to them. And we have to make time in a limited day. Like, schools are so highly regimented that even a minute early for anything can throw everyone off. Like, it's that regimented that everyone has to be exactly on time as often as possible for things to work out. And if you're not on time to go to like your specialist or something, the specialist is going to be upset because you robbed them of time, what they were supposed to teach the kids. And if you're late to pick them up, then you are impeding the next class from coming in. And if you're late to pick them up, that could also fuck with your day too, and what you're teaching the kid. Like, it's highly regimented, and there's just some. I'll admit there's some issues there.
And the fact is, you can't solve public health problems without public health approaches.
Right.
That if we actually want kids to get moving, we need to just make it easier for them to.
To a certain extent, I agree. I think that more funding for extracurricular, like, I understand that we don't want the schools to be responsible for physical education, mental education, and that sort of thing, like I mentioned with the SEL stuff, and the way that schools are treated as all the more constant, holistic way of like raising children, essentially. I think that extracurricular activities, funding for extracurricular activities in support of these ideals like physical fitness and stuff would be better, but we need funding for those things. And it's that way, yes, it's technically part of the school, but usually there's a third party that comes in for the extracurricular activities, so it's spread out and it's not something that the teachers have to worry about teaching as much.
To do that, right? Again, we need to close streets and give them a place to play. We need to make it safe for them to walk and bike to school. We need to build playgrounds and parks near them so they can use them. We need to give parents decent working schedules so they can go on walks with their kids and throw frisbees around.
At that point, though, you're getting far further into anything with the physical education, physical fitness stuff, because I think that PE still has a place in school. I just don't know if it should be responsible for as much as it is, especially with for as little support as it gets. I like what tends to be a lot of the elementary school teachers that I've seen, which is about making fitness fun for kids, but then also introducing them to a variety of ways to be fit. That seems to be what's going on now. Unfortunately, that's not very conducive to the current fitness test. So there is that needs to be worked out. But I'm still in favor of extracurricular activities as a way of helping solidify ideals, so that way it's not as much put on teachers, you know?
Yeah.
It's these things that will actually encourage the outcomes that we want, rather than just fucking raising awareness of like exercise is good and fatness is bad.
Right. We also don't need to tell people that smoking is bad.
You need to tell children. You 100% need to tell children. Children don't have like the what's considered common sense. They don't have it. So you do need a program that does emphasize, healthy eating and exercise is good. My bigger issue was that on top of trying to create that there's no curriculum provided, yet there are these standards that have to be met with no real support. That's the issue that I see with the testing as it stands now. But you 100% need something that tells kids smoking is bad, drugs are bad, exercise is good, healthy eating is good, this is what healthy eating looks like. They need those examples and they need the explicit education there. So I think that that's its own thing. Also, I think that the idea that, we need more parks and more places where kids can play outside and explore and have more safe areas to get physical activity. While that's good, that's far more of a systemic issue that takes far more working parts to put it in place. And if you're talking about more reasonable work schedules for parents, that's a whole thing within the business sector that is unlikely to happen because it doesn't support profits. This is an over idealized, and I think goes to the fundamental issue with their critique of the physical fitness test, is that they critique it so much, but their solutions are widely systemic that would require a huge amount of multiple working parts to come together in this cohesive unit that is just so over idealized that it is, the likelihood of it happening is minuscule.
At this point,
Yes.
if you are smoking at this point, it is for other reasons than not knowing.
Yes.
Like, you don't need to worry that fat people don't know that it's like bad to be fat,
Right.
or that it's seen as bad to be fat. Like, you don't need
Yes.
to worry about that. That box is checked.
So that's very interesting. Those are two really different, like, if you don't know that smoking is bad for you, that you're smoking for other reasons, versus if you don't need to tell fat people that being fat is perceived as bad. Those are two different, very different things. The issue with being fat is that it poses additional health risks, not that it's you look bad or are a bad person for being fat. That's not what's taught to the kids. That's not how anything, like, that's not how that works.
Team.
So the closest thing to a happy ending that we're going to get is it appears a lot of states are actually starting to finally get rid of these absurd laws requiring fitness tests. So California is at the vanguard of this. There's a big debate in California right now about whether to get rid of this requirement. And interestingly, it is being led by the parents of non-binary kids.
Oh, sure.
Because these male, female, totally different, binary requirements, the trans kids, non-binary, intersex kids, and their parents are like, well, this is really alienating to me, and fuck you.
Right.
So I hope that this results in a broader movement to just get rid of these tests altogether.
Seriously.
So yeah, that's the end of my long, torturous, depressing journey through the president's physical fitness test. It's worse than you thought.
It's so much worse than I thought, but I also have to say I feel oddly at peace and validated. That it wasn't just a shit show for me and for the fat kids that I knew and the disabled kids that I knew, but that it is just a garbage fire of public policy.
Yes.
From every angle. It's pretty indefensible at this point.
Yes. There was no evidence to do it in the first place. The evidence that it works is non-existent, and the evidence that getting rid of it is good is there. So just on every level.
All right, I'm gonna leave it there because they're pissing me off now. I think after hearing and going through this entire episode of the podcast, there are some legitimate issues with the presidential physical fitness test. I'm not saying that there's not. We don't have the curriculum to support it, and it does end up, trauma is a big word. I would say it ends up being a negative experience for most students because they are not given the tools to succeed in that. Does that mean that the fitness test in and of itself is terrible? Not necessarily. I think it needs some tweaking. I think it needs more funding. I think it needs a curriculum that the PE teachers can utilize in order to promote student success. And while I think that their ideas of just streets strictly for pedestrians is nice, and you have to take into account the everyday lives of the average person, and any streets that you close down should not impact the majority of people whenever possible, because then you're just punishing the people that have to commute to a certain extent. There's just so few people can work within walking distance of where they live. So few people can do that. Most people commute and have to commute by car because of distance. There are some lucky ones that it's on a bus route and the bus route is fairly reliable, so you can jump on the bus, but that's not necessarily promised to anyone. So a lot of their solutions ignores other issues that would potentially become even bigger issues with their solutions. I agree that local parks are important. Getting the funding for the maintenance of those parks is another thing that has to be considered, because the Parks and Rec department also tends to be underfunded with staff that can monitor and remove graffiti change out the trash bags, maintain the grounds, maintain the playground equipment to ensure that it remains safe for children. There's all sorts of, like, you guys are like, this needs to happen because studies show. It's like, okay, but think about the holistic picture. Think about everything that it would take to maintain and upkeep that. A playground that has significant graffiti on it, the grounds are not maintained, the trash is overflowing, is not necessarily going to be a good place for kids. If there are drug addicts in the area that use that park because it's not patrolled very often because staffing is short for both police and the Parks and Rec department, and are using it as a place to shoot up at night, and so there's needles left over on the playground and in the playground bathrooms for the kids to discover, then it's not a safe place for, like, you guys are ignoring. And I say this because, like, I'm very much in favor of safe injection sites, which I've gotten even from my own family. Like, people have had issues. They're like, that's ridiculous. Why would we be encouraging? It's not to encourage drug use. It is to keep other public spaces safe. That is how I view it. That is why I am in favor of it. Because otherwise, drug addicts are using library bathrooms and other open to the public spaces to do their drug of choice or whatever, which is negatively impacts those that don't want to be around that. And those that don't want to be around that and are utilizing places like public parks and the libraries are often those who are more economically disadvantaged and can't enjoy a private paid for subscription to some sort of gymboree or what have you. So while all of these ideas are great on paper, you have to think about the reality of the situation. And this goes for a lot of social justice people that I've seen, and for the fat acceptance movement just as a whole, is that they often operate under these ideal assumptions and they don't take, it's something I call rhetoric versus reality. The rhetoric sounds fantastic half the time. A lot of the time it sounds reasonable, but when it's put in the context of reality, they always say, your opinion or your ideas or whatever don't exist in a vacuum. The same goes for you. Just because the idea of having more public parks sounds good on its face, it can turn into a disaster if there is not enough support and there's not enough foundation work there to support the park. Everything is interconnected. Everything requires constant funding and support to keep it running. And if something goes bad, it can create a bigger issue than if it wasn't there in the first place. So those are just my ideas as someone that's worked in both a public library and in multiple schools. You have to think about the underwork, the unseen work that goes into these ideas. You have to think about the reality of the situation, the logistics of the situation, and not just get on your idealistic high horse and say, this idea is a good idea. It can be a good idea all day long. If there's not funding to support the idea being executed in a sustainable manner, then the idea falls on its face. But that's just my perspective. This has gone on along. I'm sorry, I know I went off on some unrelated tangents this time. There's been some stuff going on in the schools with funding. That's been a big topic of discussion, so it's been on my mind lately. And I think I got lost in the weeds a couple of times. But let's just talk real quick. I lost another pound. Makes me happy. I'm almost done with my macrame rug, so I'm hoping to be able to take a picture for you guys, and have it as like my closing picture or something next time. I'm not playing video games. I'm actually having a really hard time staying on top of anything lately. I'm so tired. I'm slowly getting used to my new schedule and the nature of working at two schools, and one where I literally don't sit down for 3 hours, and I'm constantly walking, constantly moving, constantly, and that's just one school where I have 3 hours where I'm not sitting down, and then at the other one, it's often like 2.5 hours that I'm moving without sitting. So I'm spending a lot of time on my feet, and it's exhausting. And I'm just not. I'm slowly getting used to it. When it comes to what I'm reading, I'm really loving Divorcing My Tyrant Husband. I can't express to you how much I adore Divorcing My Tyrant Husband. A Villainess's Revenge is Sweeter Than Honey is showing some promise, but I'm not sure about it just yet. I'll probably talk more about that one next time. Beloved by My In-Laws is still very good. Where is... Villainous Violet is something that I've been reading through. It's very simplistic in its storytelling, and it very much reads kind of like a fan fiction. It's good, and thankfully it has a time tell free option. I would recommend reading it only through the time tell free option if you like the really basic romance, because that's basically what it is. It's a really basic romance. A Marriage Alliance for Revenge is becoming so good. Like, I ended up buying all of the current episodes, and there is a romance blooming between them, but what I like so much more is the focus on the subtle political social movements that both sides are trying to do to orchestrate a situation in their advantage. Like, it is a constant game being played, and I love this shit. I really recommend A Marriage Alliance for Revenge. It's really good. Ashtart's also showing some promise, but I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about it just yet. It's slow to get into the plot. Father, I Don't Want This Marriage is another absolutely fantastic one. If you like, I find myself very drawn to family stories that have like maybe a romance on the side, but the focus is the dynamic between the family. This is one of those. And it's very good. There's a whole lot of intrigue that's happening. I've just reached the point now where I can't do any more unlockable chapters, and I have to buy the last 15 or so. So I'm probably going to finish this before my video next week. And that's about all I have to say for today. This video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to leave it here. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.